Brother. Wrestling can be so fun sometimes. When the crowd screams, "Whoa," at a Cody Rhodes entrance, when everybody says the name L.A. Knight, yeah, when Chris Jericho tries to coin a witty new catchphrase, and we're all like, okay. But you can't have joy without sorrow. You can't have light without dark. In order for our heroes' wins to mean something, they must have times of struggle. And sometimes those struggles get a little too true to life, a little too dark, and it ain't fun. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling. Let's take a look at 7 dark moments that WWE would like us to forget. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and pedigree that notification bell. Number 1. Rock bottom. A lot of the things on this list can be explained away by saying heels are gonna be heels, they have to do evil things to get you to boo them. And in the summer of 1998, it was getting harder and harder to get people to boo The Rock, as WWE was headed into SummerSlam riding the white-hot feud between the Nation of Domination and D-Generation X. The crowd was already starting to take a shine to the People's Champ. So, on the Monday Night Raw before The Rock was scheduled to defend his Intercontinental title in a ladder match against Triple H, they had The Rock go toe-to-toe with the most popular member of DX, Chyna. But he didn't do it alone, he brought the Nation with him. No problem, Chyna has buddies as well, but over the course of the segment we would learn that DX was barricaded in their dressing room with a forklift. After The Rock did a pretty standard promo about how he was going to defeat Triple H, he then told Chyna that he could sense that she was attracted to him and she just needed to get some. Owen Hart and D'Lo Brown would hold her in place as The Rock would say, "Put her down on her knees where she belongs." From there he'd say, "You look pretty damn good on your knees. It almost looks like a natural position." The implications were not subtle. He'd grip her face and say, "This has been coming for a long time, and The Rock is just the man to give it to you." Ultimately, The Rock would determine that he was too good for Chyna, but he gave orders for Mark Henry to pucker your damn lips and give that piece of trash the thrill of her life. Fortunately, Shawn Michaels, who was not a member of DX at the time, was able to come to her aid and chase the quartet away. Why is this so disturbing? Well, for a variety of reasons, honestly, but the fact that the super strong Chyna was placed in a position to be a damsel in distress brought to light the horrible truth that something like that could happen to just about anyone. Number 2. Do you really want to hurt me? The February 13th, 2003 episode of SmackDown featured one of the most bizarre segments in the show's history. The Undertaker, who was looking to gain revenge on the Big Show, was invited to the ring by Paul Heyman. There, the Undertaker was greeted by a giant gift box. This wasn't uncommon at the time, as they had done something similar with Brother Love the week before. When the box was opened, Chris Kanyon, former WCW United States and Tag Team Champion, would emerge dressed as legendary new wave singer Boy George. And Kanyon hadn't been seen on WWE TV for quite some time, so it was a bit of a surprise. Even more surprising is when he'd then proceed to serenade The Undertaker with a very pitchy rendition of "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" Now, mind you, this is not some timely reference to one of the Culture Club's biggest hits. This song was over 30 years old at this point. An annoyed Undertaker would turn his attention toward Paul Heyman, who was now on the entrance stage, which gave Kanyon the opening to launch a sneak attack. Taker would eventually shake off this early assault and proceed to give Kanyon a hellacious beating. For a coup de grace, the Demon of Death Valley would then finish off Kanyon with one of the most violent chair shots you're ever going to see. It was all weird. Usually when someone returns to the company, they do so in a way that elevates them, not immediately buries them. So why Kanyon? Why dated 80s references to Boy George? Just why to all of it? In his biography, Wrestling Reality, The Life and Mind of Chris Kanyon, Wrestling Gay Superstar, Kanyon would say, "It was Paul Heyman, one of Vince's right-hand men, who told me they had a skit for me. Vince wants you to sing like a faggot," he said. He went on to tell me they wanted me to dress like Boy George and come out of a big closet. I had to rehearse all of it, and Vince was on hand to watch, laughing his ass off. The more I thought about it, the more certain I was he did this for 2 reasons: to see how far he could push me, and to see if I would admit to being gay. Honestly, none of that sounds out of character for the former owner of the company. However, there were some concerns about The Undertaker's role in all of this. On his 6 Feet Under podcast, he defended the way he hit Canyon with a chair by saying, "I've been accused of smashing Canyon with a chair because he was gay. I didn't even know he was gay. I didn't even know until years later. I couldn't care less. But there's people out there that have created that rumor. Oh, Undertaker smashed him. Undertaker swung a chair the way Undertaker swung a chair." What was confusing and uncomfortable to watch then is even more so now, knowing that Canyon had been dealing with bipolar disorder at the time, and he felt the need to participate in the storyline, seeing as the WWE was the only major player in the industry at the time. At the end of the day, just a bad look all around. Number 3. Barking Mad. WrestleMania 17, X7, is one for the ages, arguably the best of all time. The Rock versus Steve Austin in the main event is a classic. You've got the second TLC match between the Hardys, Dudleys, and Edge and Christian. Angle versus Benoit got American fans to cheer for Mad Wrestling. That's a miracle. And you've also got the glorious cluster F that was Shane McMahon versus Vince McMahon. What a ridiculous example of bat poop crazy storytelling actually paying off in something wonderful. Never mind the fact that in the middle of the storyline that featured Shane McMahon purchasing WCW, all of that played second fiddle to the fact that Vince had drugged his wife Linda McMahon into a freaking coma and was making out with Trish Stratus in front of her. Attitude Era was wild, man. Oddly enough, that segment doesn't make the list, but there is one step on this road to WrestleMania that everyone still talks about. Vince wanted to prove that his loyalty was to his daughter Stephanie and not to his mistress Trish. So he set up Trish to get humiliated by Stephanie and William Regal during a match on Raw. The end result was Trish getting assaulted with a filthy mop. Gross. Trish confronted Vince the next week and everyone expected her to lay into him, but instead, she apologized. Oh, it was a punch in the gut to everyone who's ever seen a friend get back with an ex that you knew was just a piece of trash. And now that McMahon knew that he had complete control over the Canadian bombshell, he made her prove her loyalty by crawling on all fours, barking like a dog, and eventually stripping down to her bra and panties. This segment was so controversial that it never even aired in the UK. But it actually did hold some storyline merit. It was later determined that Trish had decided to turn on Vince and had stopped giving Linda the medication that kept her in a comatose state. The two were in cahoots on a plan that would climax at WrestleMania, with Trish taking out Stephanie McMahon and Linda rising from the chair to give Vince a shot in the old grapefruits. So what's the problem? Bad guy does bad thing and gets comeuppance. It's basic storytelling, right? Well, in light of all the horrific stuff that's come out about Vince as of late, everything from that era has to be put under a microscope. But in this instance, it all seems to be on the up and up. Trish didn't perform the segment under duress in 2001, and she still doesn't have a problem with it to this day. On an Inside the Ropes interview, Trish would state that she did the angle because it was a way to gain some sympathy for her heel character, which would lead to a face turn at WrestleMania. Well, that makes us feel somewhat better about it, but the audience is allowed to draw their line as well, and for a lot of people, this was just way too much. Number 4. Cellmate. For the most part, professional wrestling relies on what most people would consider to be cartoon violence. That's not to make light of what the performers put themselves through. It hurts to get hit with a steel chair or a kendo stick, but how often are steel chairs and kendo sticks used in a real fight? It's extremely rare when a knife or a gun is used in a WWE angle. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the incident where Brian Pillman shot at Steve Austin when he was breaking into his house, which was so intense and out of left field that it nearly got the WWE thrown off of the USA Network. There was an angle where Carlito had supposedly sent Jesus to stab John Cena in a nightclub. Yeah, that happened, but off-screen, mercifully. These depictions of more realistic violence are rare, and thankfully so, because they don't come off particularly well. Seriously, if you stab John Cena in the liver at a nightclub, you're not going to face him at the Armageddon pay-per-view, you're going to jail. So it's with that in mind that we discuss the third ever pay-per-view Hell in a Cell match that took place at WrestleMania 15 between The Undertaker and the Big Boss Man. This match had quite a lot to live up to, following in the footsteps of The Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels Classic that saw the debut of Kane at Bad Blood 1997, and the all-time shock fest that was Mankind and The Undertaker at the 1998 King of the Ring. And they did not deliver. This match is terrible. Under no circumstances should you go out of your way to watch this news fest. But the post-match festivities, now that's a different story. After the pinfall, the Brood would rappel from the rafters onto the top of the cell. They'd then lower a noose down to the Undertaker. He'd place the noose around the Boss Man's head. Then Paul Bearer would raise the Hell in a Cell cage, thus hanging the Big Boss Man. There he is, Cobb County's finest, hanging by his friggin' neck. Now, obviously, this is pretty stupid, because despite dangling from a noose for at least a minute, Boss Man was fine. Thankfully, the good folks at the First Union Center and those watching on pay-per-view weren't witnessing a murder. Needless to say, this dumb display does not get brought up when people are bragging about WrestleMania moments. Number 5. Mark's Therapy. We've talked a lot about Mark Henry in these lists over the years. Heck, he was in the first entry on this list, and honestly, how could we not? There were a ton of tasteless angles that took place in the Attitude Era, and somehow, Mark Henry was in the center of quite a few of them. Mae Young giving birth to a hand, Mark Henry the Sunday, Mark Henry and Sammy. Well, on the October 7th, 1999 edition of SmackDown, Henry finally made his way to see a therapist to deal with his sex addiction, and seeing the doctor he chose should tell you in what direction the skit is going to go. Mark would crack jokes throughout the session, and while yeah, it's probably not great to make fun of an actual addiction, know that this was all in line with how ridiculous this angle had been up to this point. Finally, the therapist would get Henry to admit that his first sexual encounter was when he was 8 years old. And worse, maybe worse, I don't know, it's all bad. Yeah, worse. Definitely worse. The encounter was with his sister. As the therapist would encourage him to continue, he'd then admit to having sex with his sister just a few days ago. Open palm, insert face. Now, let me rant for a second. TV time is the business's most precious commodity. Ideally, it should be used for something that entertains the audience, elevates a talent or storyline, and promotes a product. And if you can figure out something that does all three, you are golden. This did none of the three. It wasn't particularly funny. It didn't make Henry a more compelling or sympathetic or even hated character, and if anything, it turned people off who find that kind of thing disgusting. You know, most people. But Vince probably had a big old guffaw, so it was worth it. In hindsight, the fact that Henry was able to come back from all of this and become a world champion is just a testament to his ability to reinvent himself. And yeah, this clip definitely ended up on the cutting room floor when it came time to induct Mark Henry into the WWE Hall of Fame. Number 6. Indecent Proposal. Only in pro wrestling and adult films can you lose your wife on a bet. Or so I've heard. I wouldn't even know how to find those kinds of films. But that's exactly what happened at the September 7th, 1997 Ground Zero Premium Live event when Goldust squared off against Brian Pillman. Pillman had simply gone too far in the feud when he claimed that Goldust's daughter Dakota was actually Brian's love child. This extremely personal feud required an extreme stipulation, and they got it. The rule stated that if Pillman lost, he'd leave the WWE forever, and if Goldust lost, Pillman would get Goldust's wife Terry Reynolds for 30 days. This was known as the Indecent Proposal match. Oddly enough, this wouldn't be the only Indecent Proposal match in WWE history, as at the Vengeance 2003 event, Billy Gunn squared off against Jamie Noble in a match where if Noble won, he'd get to spend a night with Tori. The difference being, in that storyline, Tori had made the bet and was willing to live up to the stipulation, and in this one, Terry was clearly not interested. The Loose Cannon would air segments on TV entitled Brian Pillman's Triple X Files, where it showed the duo in bed, with Terry very much in a state of distress. Now, angles like this have been done before, with someone winning access to someone as their maid for a day, something like that. But this was a man forcing a woman to have what appeared to be non-consensual intercourse. And if someone made the argument that entering into an agreement like this was giving consent, I highly doubt that's true. Because even if the agreement was that they would live as man and wife for a month, a wife still has to give consent. This storyline was going to lead to Goldust and Terry renewing their vows, with Terry turning on him and returning to Brian's side. Which maybe would have led to Terry claiming this was a ruse all along and she was down with everything that happened. She was, after all, accidentally responsible for Goldust losing the match. But this storyline never reached that conclusion, as Brian Pillman was found dead in his Bloomington, Minnesota hotel room a few days before the stipulation would come to an end. Number 7. Saying the quiet part. Well, it looks like we have saved the worst for last. It's a well-known fact that when Stephanie McMahon was pregnant with her first daughter, Vince pitched an angle where it would look like he was the father. And when she flat out refused, he then offered up Shane McMahon as the storyline baby daddy. This one we're about to talk about is probably just as bad, only this one actually made it onto the show. Stephanie McMahon was the general manager of SmackDown, and her father Vince had been feuding with her newest signee, Zach Gowen. On the June 19th, 2003 episode of SmackDown, Steph would barge in on her father, making out with Sable, which, yeah, the Vince Sable thing could honestly be its own entry on this list as well. Steph would throw Sable out of the room and then lay into her father. It started with Vince just thinking Steph was annoyed that he was fooling around on his wife, but it got much darker very quickly. Stephanie would say, "I'm sorry that all of my life I've let you manipulate me and use me. Every time I've went out to dinner with one of your business associates, I was 17 years old. You don't think they told me what you promised them I'd do? And guess what, Dad? I did it. I did it for you. The things I did with them, and I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of myself that I'm just like you." The point of this was that Stephanie needed to save Zach Gowen as a way to save her own soul. But let's not bury the lead on this one. Stephanie admitted that her father trafficked his underage daughter to business associates. This is horrifying from a storyline perspective, and it's oddly something I'm shocked they haven't completely erased from the WWE network. And with what we know now, it's just so much worse. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other dark moments that the WWE would like us to forget? If so, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and double arm DDT that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling saying bye-bye.